Okay, welcome everybody to this roundtable looking at the future of reward and recognition. I'm Jo Hunt and I work for ECC, and I'm supporting our workshop leader in Hodson in this morning's session. It's great to have so many of you here. There is a Q&A function available and a chat function, so we do encourage you to ask questions or make comments in there, and we'll try to address as many as possible before the end of the session. Now, I think if we go back 12 months, we would have all appreciated a crystal ball to see what 2020 had in store for us. Ian has been chairing reward groups for ECC every 2 weeks, so we'll offer great insight on the trends we've seen emerging through the group in 2020 and what we can expect in 2021. So over to Ian to provoke your thoughts and ensure we are prepared for 2021.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jo. Hope everybody can hear me, and this is certainly going to be an interesting challenge. The first attempt at a virtual round table. So we'll talk a little bit how it'll work. I can see we've still got a few more people joining us, and this is going to be quite interesting because normally at this stage of the conference, we're all in the same room together and we're all talking across a physical table. So we'll see how we go along. I mean, the good news is we certainly are all socially distant, so I don't think we have to worry about face coverings or anything like that. But what I'm going to do is, in the run into Christmas, which is where we're normally at, it's a good chance to revisit kind of that past, present and future, and to think about reward and recognition and where that might be going forward. And what I'm going to try to do is to draw in some of the conversations that we've been having in the Northern Reward Group every 2 weeks, and shaping it around looking at the impact that COVID's had and what we think it may change going forward. So the way we're going to make this work is I've got some prompts on some slides that I'll take you through and talk you through. Over on the left-hand side, we've got the questions and answers box, and we'll go for that one. It's very hard to bring people into the conversation, but what I would ask is if you could prompt your thoughts, your discussions, into the question box, then I'll read them out and share those, and Jo will support me with that wherever we can. And what would be really great is if from this session in around 37 minutes time, everybody's able to take away, the feeling that we've had a discussion, we've learned a little bit about what's going on in other places, and certainly left us all with some thoughts about what happens going forward. So normally at this point, I'd probably say, and if we could all nod to say that seems okay, but I'm going to assume it is, unless somebody tells me different on the questions. So first of all, that quick overview about what I'm going to have a look at. So we are going to have a look at the impact of COVID on reward packages to look at what's that actually changed. We're going to have a quick think about remuneration and how now with the tightening belts that Nick was talking about over the pounds, we've probably got more pressure on looking at our broader reward package because we can't be as dependent on remuneration anymore. We're going to have a talk about a more agile workforce and whatever the new norm looks like, how we can support a workforce that's going to be operating in slightly different ways. We're going to think about employee well-being, not that we ever haven't, but just to think about how that's perhaps changed throughout this period of the last 12 months. We're going to have a think about what's going to work well in a virtual workplace when we talk about the employee proposition or the employee package, but what's going to work well if we are working in more virtual ways. And then as ever, we'll have a quick chat about communication if we get the opportunity, and thinking about being more geographically diverse. And in a university where communication has always been quite challenging, how we might want to think about that going forward. Again, I'm going to take it that everybody's nodding along with me there. I always think this is quite a nice way of looking at the impact of COVID, and words spring to mind about what this has actually been for us of, yes, it's been a game changer. Yes, it's been a real accelerator of some of the issues that we've been discussing and thinking about for the future, that actually it's meant that we've had to do a lot of things at pace that maybe wouldn't happen quite so quickly. And it's given us some extremities as well. So if we think about our standard line, what COVID's given us always is extremities of activities above the line and below, which always means we've got much more challenging situations to deal with. So for me, if we think about the impact of COVID, I think these phases are a good way about thinking about it. You know, the resolve phase, which was very much around us having to dig deep, go to our contingency plans, find solutions quickly, and operate very differently. We've got that resilience phase that I think we've had now. That was the very long summer that we went through of trying to keep everybody, where there's possibly individuals struggling with home working, the lockdown period, childcare, etc. But getting everybody through that summer, which wasn't the summer that we're used to psychologically as being a real high of the year. The stage that I think we're in now is probably stage number 3, return, which is about stability, that, you know, we've come to terms with the situation we're facing. I won't say that there's not new challenges every day, but I think we are in that period of it's stabilized as what it is. And then stages 4 and 5, which for me, you know, as a HR professional, as I'll always say, if we take away the seriousness of the situation, this is the opportunity for us to really think about what can we do differently going forward, and for us as professionals, how we might actually want to have the opportunity to change things which we may have not otherwise had the opportunity to do. So first of all, let's have a look at what we think the impact of COVID has been over the last 9 months or so. So, you know, the initial impact of very much that resilience phase was very much around budgetary restrictions. And what that probably meant across the sector is that we started to target things that were very controllable in terms of having a financial result for us. Now, what that often means is that the things that we've seen targeted are often those aspects that have a high financial impact because we need to make financial savings, but often would have a low impact on motivation. So when we talk about things like a pay award, does that have a massive impact on an individual's motivation if there's a 1 or 2% pay award? Possibly not, and it's very much an expected norm. But I think what the knee-jerk reaction is that when we look at the impact of COVID is we start looking at some other matters which actually probably have a low impact financially, but have a massive impact on motivation. So in our sector reward group, when we went through this resilience phase, we started talking about, you know, people cancelling the recognition awards or not doing service awards. And actually, when you look at the cost involved, it's actually very small, but for individuals and motivation has a massive impact. So there's this real fine balance that when we're trying to find financial controls of trying to make sure that we don't take away immediately things that are actually going to impact on employee motivation. So just looking at some of those initial impacts that we've seen as a result of COVID, we know about the cash flow issues that it creates for universities, mainly through that removal of the accommodation money as we went into the first lockdown period for universities in terms of ending the prior academic term. And how universities then have the constraints of the student market, particularly on the international students. We know about the sector pay freeze. Obviously, from a union perspective, we've still got disputes on the pay freeze from prior years, never mind the pay disputes that will probably happen going forward. So there's not going to be a big increase in pay going forward, other than that which is dictated by either the Chancellor yesterday in the spending review with the living wage and minimum wages, or by those organisations that track the voluntary living wage. So the pay spine is going to be interesting, but we can expect to see not big increases in base pay. Voluntary senior pay reductions became more of a norm, certainly with vice chancellors offering to take voluntary pay cuts, and pressure from the unions to see that happen. We've seen things like academic promotions be cancelled or pulled for the year. Have to think about what that means in terms of motivation for individuals. Some universities we know have frozen incremental progression for individuals, typically 3% for each increment, typically 2/3 of a workforce. So again, a significant sum of money, but impact on motivation. We've seen the scaling down of recognition awards, and in some cases, as I mentioned, rewards and recognition events being cancelled or removed or frozen. Popular benefits being installed as just no longer relevant. If you think about things like cinema discounts, etc., throughout this period, they're not relevant. And we've also had very challenging communication channels. So we're very used to, in a university, having people physically present in one location, and our communication tools of employee roadshows, posters on the walls is how we're able to communicate. So the impact is it's been quite easy to lose those communication channels as we've all been working in different ways. So those are some of the initial impacts that we've seen on the workforce, both financially and non-financially. So I'm going to throw it open now to some of you to input and feedback to the other people in the group about, so what's been the most significant impact of COVID on your university, and how you approach reward and recognition, and what sort of changes have you made? And then how have you changed your approach as you've progressed throughout the stages of COVID? So does aspects such as the impact on pay and increments, first of all, have an impact on you, followed by how are you now dealing with that change now? So I'm just going to keep an eye on the questions box and just see if people want to share their thoughts, and I'll give you all a minute just to type your responses. But very much in that initial impact phase, what sort of activities have you seen going on? Just going to keep an eye on that and just see. Please feel free to share away. Your input is what colleagues can take away to shape their plans going forward. Now, Joe, I'm just checking, but I can't see any questions popping up on my box.
No, there's nothing in there or chat at the moment, as far as I can tell.
Okay, I'll just give it a few more seconds, and if nothing pops up, we'll double check that there's not an issue with what we're seeing, and if so, I'll move on to the next slide, I think. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Sarah's just popped up. So promotions for 1920 have been effectively delayed until April 2021 from August 2021 going ahead as normal. That's interesting, Sarah. So very much an initial delay, but you're still going to do them, and then 2021 going ahead as normal. So always interesting there over talking about the impact on academic colleagues, and obviously their academic promotions round is very much their chance to progress on their career pathway. Interesting from a HR point of view that what we're probably going to end up with is 2 years condensed into one there in terms of promotion activities, which will be interesting. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move us on to the next slide and just bring in a different aspect now, which is more about just thinking about the more agile workforce. So I think what we do know is that there's lots of change and challenge on that remuneration aspect and on our financial strategies for the budget that we've got available to reward individuals. So it's quite interesting to think about where that's going to leave us. And what we do know is that we won't be able to be dependent on remuneration alone to be a good employer. It needs to be much more than that in terms of recognition as well, and voluntary benefits. So let's start thinking about what a more agile workforce is going to look like, and how we might need to support them with being a good employer. So I think first of all, what we are likely to see, and we've seen it throughout this stabilised phase, is that home work in itself can be much more perceived as a benefit for individuals. We often speak about one of the best benefits we can give an employee is around that flexibility, and home working as a benefit in itself actually allows you to give people back time of day. So, some of the feedback we've had from the reward group is very much around, individuals who are able to actually do the school run, do their exercise class, around not having that commute to work. And that's quite interesting to think about how home working as an actual benefit might be packaged up going forward as being a much more flexible employer in that retention and attraction piece. So are we likely to see more requests for different hours? I think we are likely to see a lot more individuals. There's a report out this week saying that we could see up to 50% of individuals requesting to work in a more flexible way. And of course, the challenge we've got now is that actually, having all gone to working remotely, it seems to have worked out okay. So it's very hard to say that it's not going to work. The big question will be that how can we accommodate those changes to people working at different times of the day? And it certainly needs a very structured plan in terms of embedding becoming a more agile workforce. I think some of the trends we're seeing is that it's quite easy for individuals to feel that they have to be available from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, just to accommodate the fact that people are all working at different times. I think we're always going to get that as we go through this, what is a trial period almost. But if we tailor it correctly, it certainly could be something that could be a huge benefit to individuals. And a little bit later on, I'm going to share some results from our Wellbeing survey that we did with our workforce, which have some very interesting trends to explore. Thinking about the non-financial benefits, what again we've seen throughout COVID is the extremes of financial circumstances, and often not through direct employment with a university, but partners or family members, losing their jobs through COVID, and seeing those financial extremities of people who are needed support around those matters. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got the extremity of individuals where perhaps they had a second home in the city and lived away, where they've been able to relinquish that tenancy, or they've saved significantly on things like a season ticket to commute to the workplace. And actually they've got more funding that they actually are better off as a result of how we've been working as an agile workforce. So we've got to think about those financial extremities of how do we support those individuals who may say, well, actually, I've got a little bit of spare money that I want to do something with, as well as those individuals where, as a result of this, we've seen them left in financial hardship. I think mental health has got a very different role to play in terms of the agile workforce. And I think we've seen the priorities change in terms of which aspects of mental health are we talking about. We know we've got the intrinsic links between mental and financial health that we've always had. But I think here and through agile working, we've seen much more of a link between social well-being and individuals' mental health, and even things like the weather. And we had this discussion at Reward Group about the fact that, yes, we had a very long summer to try to get our workforce through. The difference was we still had the sun shining. As we've approached now what seems like it's going to be a very long winter, it's almost layered up into being a real challenge to think how are we going to get individuals through this period of November to February, because certainly when the sun's not shining, home working, which is can be seen by many as a real benefit, but once you can't get outside the door and once you can't get out in the garden for a walk, etc., people feel a lot more restricted and constrained. So we've got to think about those mental health issues that we're going to see at different times of year if we're not all working in the same physical space. Engagement. Again, we forget at the university about how important for engagement are actual physical spaces. And often in the university environment, there's going to be lots of opportunity for people to engage in different activities, whether that's volunteering on open days or graduations. And people really sense that connection to the employer. We've got to think about engagement for almost that virtual workforce, and how do we make sure that individuals can still engage in the same way and feel that same connection if they're not in the same environment as the students, and if they're not able to get that energy and buzz that goes along with that. We need to think about management. Certainly making sure that we reward a much more agile workforce isn't as easy as just changing how we work. I think in universities, we have traditionally been a sector that manages by presenteeism and by seeing people in our office environment. But actually what we need to do is to learn to manage by output, to make sure that those flexibilities are able to be present, which might mean we have to change how we recruit, how we appraise, how we set objectives, which certainly is going to need some additional thought rather than how we're doing it at the moment. Recruitment and first impressions. We know that it's very important as part of recruitment that people, when they come to a university, we typically will show them round. They will get a sense for what we're about, our culture, our campus. How do we recreate to make ourselves a good employer, those first impressions, if it's not quite so easy to come to campus, or if you're not always going to be working on campus? And then surveys and focus groups, linking back to what we said about communication. How do we make sure that we're actually getting input both ways and people feel that they are contributing to what's going on in the workplace and the employee, and we don't get a distant relationship? So I think there's lots of benefits and flexibility there. And I guess a final one that we could add on is thinking about performance and recognition for an agile workforce, and how do you make their reward relevant and appropriate for how they're working, particularly when they may not be in the physical workplace. So I'm just going to pop up a second set of questions here for you all just to have a look at, and hopefully we'll see a few people pop some thoughts into the questions box. But if we start thinking about going forward, how we might reward a more agile workforce, there's three questions there just for you to share your thoughts on. So first of all, in terms of your employee offering through this stability stage, how have you actually changed your offering to staff, and what new additions have you made? And what's been the impact that you've seen maybe that others can take away and say, wow, if that works, maybe we need to think about that. How have you actually made sure that you're gathering input on how you're trying to shape the employee offering? So how have you communicated with employees, gathered their feedback, whether that's through surveys or working groups or management relationships? And then how are you ensuring that you can connect the workforce with the employer brand that is certainly strong at universities to make sure that people still feel part of the university? So if you've been looking at these aspects of shaping how the package has changed throughout COVID and how you've kept people connected, please just pop up your thoughts in the question box and we'll have a quick chat through. Claire, thank you for getting us kick-started. So Claire strengthened your relationship with EAP provision and introduced a brand new rewards and benefits platform. Wow, Claire's been very busy there. And that sounds to me a little bit like something's jumped up the agenda in terms of priority as well there. EAPs, I think, have got a very different role to play in the future. The EAPs, which were very much often seen as, that lead on to some formal counselling often for individuals who needed help. I think EAPs will change their utilisation, and actually they'll almost replace and become the virtual manager who is there giving individuals support and guidance and advice and making people feel welcomed in the workforce. So if you think about an EAP now, such aspects such as dietary needs and how as an employer you can show an individual that you are supporting them might be through the EAP having some recipe pages or some information about people who have different dietary needs. So I think EAPs are going to be really, really important for that more agile workforce. And a brand new reward and benefits platform, we'll explore that in a moment, but I think that's particularly interesting because that sounds to me like what we're trying to do is make sure that we can clearly identify reward and benefits separately. So the days of these aspects being hidden on the intranet alongside your policies and your disciplinary and grievance policies, that's not a great place to have your motivational reward and recognition and benefits package. So that sounds to me a bit like a segregation of the communication, which sounds great. I think if it was on round the table, Claire, I'd probably ask you to talk about it a little bit more. But We'll just see if anybody else has got any more thoughts. Amanda, just starting this engagement by launching a new colleague forum to raise issues and ideas. Wonderful. Amanda, two-way communication is going to be critical. I'm going to touch on that in a slide in a moment, just about what benefits we're seeing make a comeback. But yeah, I think what we might see is a lot more people using specific communication tools going forward as well. Look, that's great, fantastic. Let's move on and start thinking about something else then. So well-being, I think, has taken on a different role now. That well-being's become much more of a benefit that needs to be proactive. And if we think about well-being, we're often talking about not just now the mental and physical health, but also things like the social well-being, the environmental well-being, and how you embed things in place that are going to proactively support that. So it's much more key now, well-being, to that motivation and engagement. And I think having a rise in significance. So just a few thoughts on well-being, and then I'll open up for some input. But one of the initial results we saw as a result of COVID was a reduction in sickness absence. And I think that's got to be a question that we say, why is that? Is it because people are healthier, because we went through a period of lockdown and they've not been coming to the workplace, and actually that reduces sickness absence because we're not all in the same environment? Or is it because actually the home working is really a benefit? And often when people call in ill, what they can't actually face is the commute to work, getting ready for work, sitting in an office with a little bit of a cough where colleagues will say, oh, I wish you weren't here, I wish you would go home. And actually, when you're working from home, you do see sickness absence come down, because that flexibility means that people are much less likely to consider themselves unable to work, because they'll sit and they'll carry on doing their emails, using the technology. And actually what the sickness absence really is that I don't feel well enough to commute and sit in the office, rather than I don't feel well enough to work. So sickness absence significantly coming down. Those intrinsic links we've touched on as those extremities between the financial and mental health, and how those link. The hidden agenda behind COVID. So we know that some aspects of the workforce where we typically don't always shine a spotlight have struggled more with this different way of working. And that's something to factor in going forward. So young males working in isolation have typically struggled on the social isolation side a lot more, and have needed more support around that. If we think about the impacts on well-being and some of these periphery factors, that if we are working away from campus are a lot harder to control if we're not in the same space. So controlling the work environment is a lot harder with people working remotely. Thinking about people and how they feel about their job security and their state of mind. Thinking about what distractions people might have to their motivation, and then just people feeling involved. One of the big aspects that I don't think we've seen come out yet will be around people's development. And when we are in the same space, we are learning all the time by overhearing conversations, by having somebody reach over from behind us and say, I'll show you a quick way of doing that. Now, if you take the last 9 months, some of that development hasn't been happening. Some of that mentoring, coaching that happens when we're all together. And we've got to think about how will we do that going forward, and also think about what's the impact on that. So, you know, for some colleagues, actually the discussions that happen around them in the workplace, the funny events that can happen, is often their activity for the day that they'll then talk to other friends about. You know, when you are working in a more agile way, it's quite easy to not have those occurrences happen, because unless there's a forced interaction or activity such as a meeting, then you're not always in contact with people. So we do need to think about that. I think that ties on to that social well-being being more of an issue, the loneliness, the lack of interaction sometimes with other colleagues, which is good on some days but not always. And how do you create the office culture virtually? So the loss of shared spaces is quite important. You know, if we think about this time of year, normally in our university college environments, there's normally a real buzz coming off the students, and actually that lifts us through to Christmas, because we feel that same energy and excitement coming from them. And that's why it's a really important part of working at a university. it's going to be very difficult to recreate that in a virtual way when actually moments such as breaking up for the Christmas break will often mean just stepping out of your home working space into the living room as another day. So we've got to think about how we sort of recreate these moments in a virtual environment, and very much that test of our own motivation. So that organization of time and space, we are starting to see some people where they're actually starting to burn out because there is no physical barrier between home and work life, or even a virtual barrier that says that your work is around you the whole time. So some of these aspects about making sure you've got that organized space is important. So really it's about getting agile right from that physical space as well. I'm just going to pop up the next questions I'm going to put to prompt some chat. So in terms of wellbeing as a benefit in your employer, how have you adapted your wellbeing offering and for the future to meet these changing trends in how we might be working and what the workplace looks like? And then how has agile working changed your longer term approach to wellbeing as part of the reform stage and reimagined stage? Over what are you changing? And I know already Claire said about their EAP, which I think we constitute definitely as part of wellbeing. So just while you pop up your thoughts there, I'm just going to share some feedback from our wellbeing survey that we undertook at the University of Lincoln. So there, 83% of our respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that implementing a more flexible way of working permanently would provide a better work-life balance. And 76% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that implementing this type of working would permanently make them happier. So I think that sets the outline that there is certainly across our workforce the fact that better work-life balance through working in more agile ways is expected and would make people happier. 42 respondents said that the current home working environment has helped with their caring responsibilities. The main challenges of working from home were identified as that work-life interaction at 23% and then technology at 18%. Good news that 80% of our respondents said they knew where to find resources around their personal well-being. The main training areas that individuals said they need to make this work longer term, noting that we know it'll make them happier, was about well-being techniques at 21%, and then Microsoft applications at 17%. 85% of respondents either strongly disagreed or disagreed with the statement that flexible working is too hard to implement in the workplace. So I think we're going to see that trend, that we won't be able to say that working more flexibly can't be done, because 85% of our people disagree with that now, and we've proven that we can make it work. So I think we will see that change. 40% of respondents always or often found their work stressful. So there's our warning sign. 42% always or often felt they needed to work longer working hours. And then 19% felt that they had too few interactions with their colleagues, and 27% of people felt disconnected from the organisation. So some real lessons there, that this can work, is expected, will make people happier, but we've got some warning aspects to take care of. So let's just see what comments we've had. So Sarah, launching a dynamic working policy for better work-life balance. That certainly sounds like the reimagination and reform, and it's here to stay. Brilliant. Sarah, again, sessions from occupational health for managers for supporting people's mental well-being. Really, really important. And when we think about that manager training, and we may want to change how we look at how we recruit people, but certainly making sure that managers have got the right skill set to manage an agile workforce through that output, not presenteeism, really important. Okay, so thinking about what needs to be reimagined, just a quick run through here. Thinking about EAP services, as I can see has happened there. Increasing that mental health first aid provision. I think we've seen certainly an accelerator there. Thinking about how recognition awards can be more virtual, but making sure that they remain in place, because people still need that recognition. Thinking about things like physical exercise, where our actual campus is a huge benefit to us normally, but if you're not coming to workplace, maybe recreating it with things like virtual running clubs or walking clubs. Thinking about how you can recreate and reimagine colleague check-ins, whether that is through organising those quizzes, coffee clubs, book clubs, film clubs, but creating the concepts that you would normally get in the office happening naturally. We may have to think about how we artificially do it. We always say that there's that cyclical nature to the office environment, and I think we're seeing some of those old favourites return with a purpose. So staff suggestion schemes are perhaps more relevant now than they've ever been to make sure that individuals feel that they're involved in shaping the direction of change, but also to make sure that actually as an employer, we're in uncharted territory for how we shape this, and actually others bringing in their ideas from sessions like what we're doing today could be absolutely critical. Health cash plans, we've seen a big surge in interest again, and some of those lifestyle discounts where they've changed in terms of what people are looking for. So increases in terms of people just looking to save money on their shopping or their cashback or their vouchers, rather than some of the traditional days out lifestyle benefits we're used to. Reimagining staff inductions, which certainly will have to take on a virtual concept and trying to demonstrate the culture of the organisation as part of that, without actually always having people present, and maybe people who need to dip into inductions at different times. Thinking about that toolkit for managers' briefings, thinking about financial vehicles that you offer, and then definitely that social wellbeing and how you embed that sense of a virtual community. So I'll just pop up this question here in terms of if anybody's concept in terms of what their priorities for 2021 are with their reward and recognition strategy, and what barrier they see in terms of being able to achieve that strategy. So if anybody's got any thoughts on that, please pop them up. And I did promise that I would revisit then some of the communication challenges that we've got. So I think these go without saying when we take away the actual physical workplace, but face-to-face conversations are a lot more difficult because we can't do it ad hocly. What we do know is that the comms strategy can't be just to use the email inbox. We are starting to see email burnout as email becomes a communication tool for everything, from some of the social things that people are organising all the way through to that business critical. So as we spoke earlier about trying to find different communication tools for specific purposes, like a reward and benefits platform, just to deal with that aspect, I think will help, because we've got to find different channels now. That leads on to having separate platforms so you can get that division of communication, and also thinking about the timeliness of people working more flexibly and how they might access it. The role of leadership and leading by example will be important with communication, and also ensuring that we're getting input coming back from employees, and also us being able to communicate with the workforce themselves. So what we don't want is people being physically silent if we're going to work in different ways. On-demand videos and articles, and making sure that employees aren't left in the dark. So if we take our university, our communication strategy is very much, we have a communication that goes out every 2 weeks, from the high level to the social aspects. We then use Twitter in terms of immediate messages that need to go out, and we use Instagram to tell colleague stories with e-cards and e-postcards in there just for regular check-ins. So communication challenges we will certainly have, and please pop up any additional thoughts if you have them on communications for how you're going to adapt your communications and how you can make them more efficient. I'll keep an eye on those, and then I'll just pop up the summary and takeaway, as I know we're coming to the end of the session. But hopefully what you'll take from that is that this is a time to reimagine the offering. We do need to be less dependent on remuneration, but we need to be very efficient. We need to remember that communication is key, and we need to make sure that people can still connect to that very strong brand that is the physical workplace, the student population and purpose, that a university is all about. And a final thought there from Benjamin Franklin, that certainly out of adversity and challenge does come opportunity. So staff addresses every Monday, I can see from Claire, which is good to see. And we'll have to think about how that comes through in the reform for communication. Joe, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say there's time for questions, but I think actually, unless anybody has some really burning questions, there probably isn't. But I'm sure Ian would be happy for you to contact him if there was anything specific you wanted to find out more about. Thanks, Ian. That was a really, really interesting session. I mean, there's so much to grapple with over the coming months, but you can also see there's quite a few opportunities there for universities as well. Next on the programme is lunch and networking, so please do take time to visit our ECC exhibitors and collect answers for the exhibitors quiz. There's a great prize up for grabs there. Do take part in the networking carousel or book appointments with your peers and colleagues. And following the break, the AGM will take place at 1:10, so please do try and attend that as well. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Ian. It was a really good session.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to go win the hamper then in the exhibition. Thank you all.
Thanks.